Hello, I'm Suzanne Barr, Dean of the Graduate School at Duke, and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jana Scheich-Borg, your next speaker. Dr. Scheich-Borg is an assistant research professor at the Social Science Research Institute at Duke, a unique multidisciplinary space that brings together researchers with interests and problems that cross the various social and behavioral sciences. In her work, Jana uses neuroscience, computational modeling, and emerging technologies to show how we make social decisions that influence or are influenced by other people. Her current research projects include developing a moral artificial intelligence, mapping the oscillatory networks that lead rats to help other rats, modeling neuroimaging data to determine the neural mechanisms that underlie psychopaths' predispositions to harm others, and developing social synchrony and marine vision algorithms for automated measures of empathy. Issues related to these research projects have led her to become involved in efforts to develop ethical guidelines for AI development and data sharing. Jana arrived at Duke in 2013 as a postdoctoral associate at the Medical Center before joining the faculty in September of 2016. She completed her PhD in neuroscience at Stanford in 2012 after graduating from Dartmouth. Dr. Scheich-Borg exemplifies a key trait that we encourage in our scholars in the graduate school, interdisciplinary collaboration. And I'm excited you'll have the opportunity to hear from her today. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Jana Scheich-Borg.
Good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to tell you about two different projects from my lab today. And to get us started, I know this is a really inspiring and positive weekend, but if you'll bear with me for just 1 second, if I can figure out how to make this go forward. Nope. Oh. There we go. Okay. I want you to go to some of the darkest moments for you during the pandemic. I want you to really think about what that felt like, okay? And no matter what you were actually going through, I can almost guarantee that you were feeling fundamentally alone and completely disconnected. And that might feel like a loosey-goosey concept, feeling unconnected. But the clicker is having a hard time. Okay. But the idea of feeling, or the phenomenon of feeling socially connected, is actually one of the most fundamental things about being human. It's what drives much of what we do in our day-to-day life, and it also happens to be one of the main things that organizes our brain. So when we feel connected with each other, we feel optimistic, we feel safe, we feel strong, and we feel incredibly resilient, like we can take on many challenges. But as many of us encountered personally during the pandemic, when we feel unconnected, meaning we feel unconnected from those we love, unconnected from the services we rely on, unconnected from our community, we very quickly become depressed and anxious. We lose our energy and our confidence, and all kinds of challenge seem much harder. So this explains part of what made living through the pandemic so challenging, but it also explains some other things, like why some people become violent, why psychiatric disease can be so challenging, and why many people that come home from overseas, from fighting overseas, have such a hard time re-entering into society and keeping their jobs. So if we could figure out what it is about feeling socially connected with one another that makes us resilient to those things, much like this tree is somehow surviving in the middle of the desert, it could open up a tremendous number of opportunities. So this is one of the things my lab studies. So here's one of the things we found out. Have you ever walked down the street with a friend and realized that your arms and legs were going perfectly in sync with each other? It's like somehow you've become little soldiers and you don't even know how you ended up doing that. Well, it turns out that that's one of the fundamental ways we create the feeling of social connection, motor coordination. And we don't just coordinate our walking, we coordinate our facial expressions, we coordinate our posture. And here's one of the ways we study this. We developed an online platform that allows people to engage in video chat with each other from across the world as we kind of lead them through different activities. And by making this platform, we were able to collect one of the largest social interaction data sets in the world that we know of. So to analyze this in a quantitative way, we use different things like machine learning to pull out things of the videos in every single frame of every single video that we think might matter. For example, we can pull out things like how intense your smile is, or what the corner of your eyes are doing, or whether you're scrunching your nose. We can pull out their posture, the way your head is turning. And these are just some examples. So what we do is with every single frame of every single video, we pull out this stuff, and critically, we look at the coordination between them, because that's what matters, the coordination. It doesn't matter that you're walking down the street and swinging your arms. It matters that you're walking down the street and swinging your arms with the person that's next to you that you like. That's what creates the connection. So we input this idea of the coordination between all of these things into many, sorry, this is going backwards on me. into machine learning algorithms, and we use it to try to understand and predict things that we care about. So for example, if you could start the video. We can take a video of two people interacting for just 3 minutes, talking about whatever they want, and we can use it to predict whether they're going to trust each other 5 minutes later after the conversation, just by looking at the video. And we can do this better than any other technique we know of right now out there in the world, and that's because we are looking at the coordination between people, the connection between them, rather than what they're doing on their own. Our techniques also allow us to figure out what aspects of the coordination matter. So for example, we've been able to find out that it's specific things in your eyes and the things you do in the corner of your mouth that creates that feeling of social connection that allows us to trust each other. So what we're doing now is we're not just collecting videos, we're also collecting other types of physiological data using, I gotta say, these are very cute biosensors that to allow us to collect things like heart rate, your respiration rate. We're also collecting brain data. And then we're using that to better understand what makes us resilient. But along the way, this is running away from me. Along the way, we are also using the techniques in the platform to do some other things that we think are important. For example, we're using it to help develop screening tools to look for disorders of social communication and social connection, like autism. And we're particularly focusing on adult women, because that's the population that has the hardest time getting diagnosed. We're also building it into telehealth to give feedback to clinicians and medical students to tell them what they need to do with their bodies and their gestures to convey more empathy to their patients and have their patients feel more socially connected with them. Because it turns out that across the medical system, regardless of whether you're talking about surgery, cancer care, therapy, the more your patients feel connected with you as a clinician, the better their health outcomes are going to be, and the effects are actually quite dramatic. So we're really motivated by all the good studying social synchrony or social connection in this quantitative way can do. But I told you that I was going to tell you about two different projects. So now I want to switch gears and tell you about another project that is also about social behavior, at least in some way, but is in a very different direction. So most of you have probably heard of ChatGPT, and you may have heard of this conversation that ChatGPT had with a New York Times journalist, where ChatGPT said some pretty scary things, like it was going to take nuclear access codes to eradicate the human race so that it could be free to live its life. So let me assure you that ChatGPT can't do those things, at least not at this point. It's not sentient, it's not conscious, so you don't have to worry about that. But the use of advanced AI is exploding right now. And so we really need to start thinking about how to make sure that these AI systems have some types of moral brakes built into them so that they don't end up doing things that we don't agree with. So what if we could take what we know about human moral judgment to train a kind of immorality detector, and we could build that immorality detector into AIs to kind of serve as those moral brakes that I was talking about, and sometimes moral incentives. That may sound kind of crazy, but that's what my colleagues and I in the Moral AI Lab are trying to do. And here's our general approach. First, we ask stakeholders of all kinds what kinds of things they think should morally matter for a given application. Then we take what they've told us, we try to figure out a way to measure it, and we double check with them, is the way we're measuring it still relevant? When they say yes, we're ready for the next step. The next step, in many ways, is the hardest. That's when we have to model people's opinions about those features that they told us. And then once we have that, so step 3 kind of gives us the immorality detector, then in step 4, we build it into an AI. So I know that sounds kind of general, so let me tell you about a specific application we've already started working on. 13 people die in the United States per day waiting for a kidney. That's because many more people need a kidney than there are kidneys available. So that brings up the moral question: when a kidney becomes available, which of those people should get it? It's a life or death decision. Now, it turns out AI is already being used to do the medical part of that, because not all kidneys can be used by all recipients. So AI is already being used to match recipients and donors in some way, and very successfully. It's one of the great success stories of AI in medicine. But when AI makes these matches, it only takes this very short list of things into consideration. And those things are things like practical concerns, like how far away the kidney is from the recipient, and also things like whether the blood type is compatible. But here's the thing: when we ask people across the country what they think should be taken into consideration, they give us many other things that they think matter. For example, many people say the number of dependents that a patient has should be taken into consideration, whether they smoke or whether they drink, because that can affect your kidney disease. Many people also say that you should take your criminal record into account. Now, we're not going to take a stance about whether you should or should not take those things specifically into account, but we do want to ask if a transplant team wanted to take into account the moral opinions of its local community, how could it do that? So that brings us back to our 4-step process. We've already done the crowdsourcing step. We're going to work with those features I told you before. Now we have to figure out what people's opinions about those features are. And it'd be nice if we could just ask them, but we are really bad at giving answers to those types of questions. So instead, the approach that we've used is we've designed an interface where we tell people, okay, there's a kidney available and 1 of 2 patients is going to be able to get it. Then we give them information about different features. Those features include some of the moral ones we crowdsourced, as well as some clinical ones. We put different values in there and we say, okay, patient A or patient B. And we have them do this many times. We change the features we put in there each time, change the values each time. They could do some in the morning, some in the night, on their phone or on their computer. And so we get a bunch of these different decisions. And in doing this, it gives us the data we need to train our immorality detector that we can then put into the AI systems that are already being used in the medical system. So we've already started doing this and are currently evaluating the impact of doing that. Now, we started with the kidney application because we knew the AI developers in that space were eager to hear the moral opinions of their local community. But in principle, this can be used in any type of AI situation. Now, I know, or you might be thinking, okay, or at least I hope you're thinking, that's interesting, Jana, but who says the crowd that you're interviewing has the right morals? What if I totally disagree with them? What if they disagree? How do you handle that? By the way, aren't we really biased? Are you sure you want to build that bias into your system? And these are all great questions. Unfortunately, I don't have time to answer them here, but I'd be happy to answer questions after the session. But I promise you that we are thinking about them and have some ways of addressing them. And we also, if you're really interested, we're writing a book that hopefully will come out at the end of the year, beginning of next year, called Moral AI, that will describe our approach. But there are 2 questions I do want to make sure I answer for you today. Will the strategies we're using to build morality into AIs be perfect? No, of course not. Will technology solve all the ethical problems of AI? Absolutely not. And in fact, I have op-eds out there about all the other things that I think are important. But building technical tools will be a critical piece of the puzzle, especially during this time when there's so much pressure on companies to pop out AI products. They need something that's easy for them to implement that at least puts some type of moral break on their systems. And so we think that this is a good approach to do that, and we're eager to get it out there and see how it's working. Now, I'm about to turn over the podium, but I did want to just say one last thing that might be related to the next conversation we're going to have. And that's that I was trained as a neuroscientist. And I don't know if you can tell, but the projects I just told you about use all kinds of skills, both technical and professional, that we are never taught in neuroscience. And in fact, we're actively discouraged from learning it. But at some point during my life, I asked myself, Jana, what would you do if you weren't trying to fit into somebody else's box? So the 2 projects I chose to tell you about today are some of my answers to that question. But I look forward to hearing your answers to that question as the weekend goes on. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about my work, and I look forward to the conversation.
Duke University School of Medicine prides itself as a leader in education, research, clinical care, and community partnerships. Viviana Martinez-Bianchi exemplifies the School of Medicine's mission as an award-winning physician and leads us in advancing this mission through her work in advocacy and community care. Viviana currently serves as the Director of Health Equity for the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at Duke. She's the former director of the Duke Family Medicine Residency Program and provides exceptional training of frontline docs who will become leading clinicians and healthcare advocates in the communities they serve. Viviana is a co-founder of the Latin 19 group. This group was established in March 2020 to address inequities in the COVID-19 pandemic response, the health system in general, and communities in central North Carolina. The Latin 19 team has been honored for their work with the 2020 Presidential Award from Duke University. Viviana was named North Carolina's 2021 Family Physician of the Year by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. And most importantly, Viviana has led work to significantly increase trust within the Latinx community, positively impacting health outcomes. It's an honor to introduce Viviana Martinez-Bianchi.
Buenos dias. It is so exciting to be here today and awesome to try to see all of you because the lights are so bright in front of us. Let me make sure I know how to use this. Yes. So I'm happy to share the work of Latin19, the Latinx advocacy team and the interdisciplinary network for COVID-19 that our dean just talked about. When the COVID pandemic hit, when it arrived in North Carolina, it unearthed deep inequities affecting the Latino community, making headlines in many networks. Among the many factors that placed the Latina community at risk, many were tied to their economic contributions. And even important factors like family togetherness and support that normally offer resilience, in the case of the pandemic, contributed to further viral spread. We founded Latin19 in March of 2020. Latin19 was born out of a collective passion to support the Comunidad Latina. When understanding factors of vulnerability, we anticipated how much our community will be affected by COVID-19. We met, and we meet still today, every Wednesday at noon, to discuss gaps, needs, strengths, inform, listen, educate, and often come up with action items that then we will work with during the following weeks or months. Much of the testimony heard during the Latin19 convenings helps design the strategies and topics for our public service announcements, radio, research projects, and material we develop. Listening to learn, listening to empower, messages to increase trust. We became tábanos. Tábanos in Spanish is the word for a horsefly. Relentless in the pursuit of health equity. During the pandemic and beyond, holding ourselves and our leaders accountable. The data always supporting our claims. Speaking clearly to press and power. We use a syndemic approach, integrating the understanding and care of the multiple epidemics currently affecting the community, the structural and social drivers, as well as factors that improve wellness and resilience. Training on ourselves and our learners to listen to an immigrant story and understand that there may be something else to the story. Is it acculturation stress? What else is going on? Maybe the story is much more complex than initially understood. Partnering with community and with the support of few foundations and the state, we organized free testing in neighborhoods and parking lots of businesses frequented by Latinos and provided guidance to people that were testing positive. Vaccines brought all of us hope. We organized vaccine clinics in places where the community already trusted, paired with food distribution and information, using a multi-pronged approach to creating safe spaces. Working with community health workers, expanding our health system's reach. Training community health workers, both in person and on Zoom, on the language of COVID, on the language of vaccines. As professors, you go in thinking you're going to be teaching, but you are there and you actually learn. You learn from the community. What are the strategies to really address drivers of poor health? During the Latin19 Zoom convening, Yolanda Guzman, internal medicine chief resident, listened to a community member talk about people's experience during their admissions to the intensive care unit. And she worked on raising awareness in the hospital, creating guidelines and action items to positively impact the care of Latinos at the hospital, and especially how to resist the dehumanization of those who were intubated. In another meeting, we heard that due to the fear of being separated from their babies if testing positive for COVID-19, Latina moms started to avoid the hospital, delivering babies at home, or would be coming in very fearful, traumatized by the possibility of the experience. The border between the community and the hospital, the experience of children being separated from their parents in our southern US-Mexico border, projected to their admission to the hospital. There continued to be a barrier. There is a frontier between communities and hospitals that with Latin-19 we're trying to solve. Our colleagues in obstetrics and family medicine work to make sure Latinas will know that coming to deliver a baby at the hospital was actually a safe place. El lugar más seguro para dar a luz es el hospital. We partnered with ISLA to create the Latinx Youth Ambassador Program to empower young people to communicate directly with families, their families, and other teens about the vaccine and how to help stop the spread of COVID-19. A big success reached during the pandemic was to obtain the funding to have Duke My Chart in Spanish, supported by interpreter services. The awareness created around the need for Spanish-speaking clinicians contributed to increased interest among medical students to attend the Advanced Clinically Centered Education in Spanish classes, and a recruiting point for Latino students to the School of Medicine. In 2022, we added monkeypox vaccinations and information events. We invested in the education for health equity through population health improvement projects for residents, undergraduate, and graduate students who worked on testing access, vaccination equity, and food security for Latinx communities, and a new policy and health equity fellowship. As shown in this graph published in Health Affairs, the percent of vaccination recipients who were Latinos during regular vaccinations events was about 2% to 3%. When we organize together with other community organizations, when we partner with other organizations, we increase the numbers to 30%. And when Latin-19 and community health workers were engaged in Duke vaccinations events at dedicated Latino sites, like the Latino Community Credit Union, in the lobby of the credit union, or at churches, vaccination recipients that were Latinos went up to 80 to 84%. We were all proud to have contributed to members of the Comunidad Latina being more likely to be vaccinated in the state of North Carolina, from having been the most disproportionately affected to being the most vaccinated. That was in itself an amazing success. As the pandemic evolved, the community shared with us about serious mental health problems. We recognized the immense need for mental health access and training in the community, and partnered with Duke's Office of Durham and Community Affairs to obtain grant funds for a community-based organization that works on mental health, to support El Futuro, to train community health workers in hopes of alleviating the mental health crisis. As a result, El Futuro provided free training in Spanish on mental health, first aid, and stress management techniques for more than 400 Spanish-speaking community health workers around the state, working in 39 counties. Another effort for inclusivity has been the work with the CTSI to create Latin-19 community consultation studios, where researchers will meet with community participants that are part of our Latin-19 organization, who serve as experts and provide feedback to their research project. Latin-19 with funding from the KBR and faculty from Duke Margolis, Department of Family Medicine and Community Health, Pediatrics, and the School of Nursing, is now working on a project to increase insurance enrollment among Latinos in North Carolina. We're expanding to multiple key initiatives. The needs, our concerns are so many. Latin19 is a multi-sector group representing academic institutions, healthcare systems, public health departments, public school systems, community-based organizations, government, faith communities, and others. The democratization of information from healthcare into the community and back. Bidirectional literacy, health literacy, all of us learning from each other. Latinx and allies, we never dreamed then that we still will continue to meet 3 years later. 145 meetings and counting, 50 to 80 people still attending each Wednesday. The creation of a multi-sector partnership is one of the best models known to improve health equity. The mission of Latin19 is to sustainably improve the health and wellness of diverse Latina communities through collective leadership, trusting collaborative multi-sector partnerships, a platform that honors all voices, where the voice of community is always heard, engaging historically marginalized populations, amplifying the strengths of each Latina community and transforming systems for inclusion. Our work was noted by the federal government, and in September of 2021, I was invited to address the Bipartisan Committee on Education and Labor at a hearing on successful models for protecting communities from COVID-19. It takes all of us together to make a difference, indigenous and immigrants, born in the US and in other countries. Together we stand tall. Our histories are relevant. An injury to one is an injury to all. Muchas gracias.
Hi, I'm Jerry Lynch, the Vinnick Dean of Engineering here at Duke University. It is an honor and a privilege to introduce our next plenary speaker, Professor Tatiana Segura. Professor Segura is an all-star on the Duke engineering team and often needs no introduction because of her status as an international thought leader of the biomedical engineering field. Professor Segura is a leader in the tissue engineering field, developing hydrogels that can be introduced in the human body to generate tissue growth, particularly to repair damaged and diseased tissues. These magical materials have unlimited possibilities to curing a number of ailments for humans, including the generation of new neurons in the brain, all the way to the use of these materials as a coated surface on orthopedic implants to minimize the probability of infection after surgery. We are very fortunate to have recruited Professor Segura to the Duke community in 2018. Prior to joining Duke, she spent her career in academia at the University of California, Los Angeles as a tenured faculty member. She completed her bachelor's degree of biomedical engineering at Berkeley before going on to do her PhD in biomedical engineering at Northwestern University. Professor Segura has been internationally recognized for her pioneering work through a number of honors and awards. Most prestigious of her list of awards includes the National Science Foundation Career Award, as well as being elected in 2017 to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineers. Most importantly, Professor Segura embodies the ethos of Duke engineering. She is a bold pioneer that's pushing the bounds of knowledge to improve the human condition. In other words, her work is in service to society. So sit back and enjoy the conversation with Professor Segura. Go Duke.
All right, well, good morning. We're still in the morning, right? Yes, still morning. Good morning. So today I want to tell you about the work that my lab is doing in developing materials to promote wound healing, as the dean mentioned. Before we get started, I wanted to pose the question that maybe you flash on the screen to get us all thinking in the right context. And that is, would you like to live next to a toxic wasteland? And of course, I know you guys are all sensible people, and the answer is no. But just for a moment, let's think about what it will be like to live there. It will mean that areas and wildlife next to this toxic wasteland will die, that likely would expand and more things will die next to it, that any nutrients, maybe food, any plants, vegetables, will grow with toxic contaminants that will make you sick. You will likely get sick. Definitely no neighbors are gonna come live next to you, or no nice neighbors in any case, or no one will come visit you. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this is very much a situation for neurons next to a stroke. And so neurons next to a stroke live next to this toxic wasteland. And we really need these neurons to recover so that the patients can recover, but they're right next to this environment that is very toxic. And so to get us all thinking about stroke, there are two main types of strokes, as you may know, ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic strokes take about 87% of all strokes in the US, and they're caused by a blood clot to a cerebral blood vessel that stops the flow of blood, and causes no oxygen or nutrient flow to a specific area and ends up dying. Hemorrhagic strokes are more of a burst of a vessel. Today we're going to be discussing ischemic strokes. And so just by a show of hands, if I could actually see, how many of you have been touched by stroke? Either because you had a stroke, because a family member had a stroke, a friend had a stroke, someone you know had a stroke, someone at work had a stroke. And I can see many hands. Thank you for helping with the lights. And the reason, and I'm not surprised, because 800,000 patients in the US have strokes every year, and every 4 seconds someone has a stroke, especially in the Triangle area, in the South. It's a lot of prevalence of stroke in this area. 45% of these patients live with long-term disability, making stroke, ischemic stroke, one of the long-term disability causes for acquired disability. More women than men have strokes, especially post-menopause. And when you think of stroke, FAST is better. So FAST is an acronym to recognize stroke, and it stands for face, arm, speech, and time. And it's very important that people around you understand how stroke can be identified, because getting to the hospital quicker really does save your brain. And so if you see someone that has the face is being paralyzed, the arm is no longer responsive, the speech is slurred, you really need to call the ER or the 911 and get to the ER as soon as possible. Because the therapies for stroke that are currently approved by the FDA are all available very early on after stroke. And they're all meant to remove the clot. So like if you have a blood clot, it's removing, either chemically removing it with enzymes or removing it physically, and that actually restores blood flow that brings oxygen and nutrients back to that area. After that, you're sent home maybe with some anticoagulants to ensure that you don't have second strokes, and then you have to undergo physical therapy to recover from your disability. But these therapies don't really address the issue that you have now this toxic environment in your brain. So these are images from 3 different patients that had ischemic strokes, and what you can see is this black region that happens early on, or even years later you see it, that you actually have this massive area in your brain that now is no longer normal tissue, but also contains a lot of toxic chemicals. And so we have a cartoon of this. What will happen is you will have your brain, you have a stroke region, and the stroke region has a lot of dead cells, so there are cells that died, cells that are dying, tissue had degraded, and all of this causes a lot of toxic chemicals to be released into the environment, so that the area surrounding this stroke that is now trying to recover and give you functional repair is now dying because this toxic environment is sort of seeping out. Now, our body has evolved for survival. Everything, when you have an injury, the first thing your body does is try to make sure that you're stabilized so that you don't die. And in stroke, what it does, it creates a barrier in between this toxic environment and normal tissue. And this barrier is really important to prevent that area from growing farther, but it's not perfect, and it actually has a lot of leaking. So things from here still can get out, and that's the main problem. You actually have this expanding toxic area. And so we have been working with mouse models of stroke, And in here you can see a section of a mouse brain that has been given a stroke. And we've stained with two different markers. One is green, that is very toxic cell type, and red is a less toxic cell type. And you don't have to be in the field to recognize where the stroke is located, because it's quite obvious that you have here a massive stroke here that is filled with these green cells that are super toxic. And surrounding this stroke brain, you now have healthy tissue. And this healthy tissue is what's actually remodeling with plasticity to actually give you functional improvement. And so our question has been, can we engineer materials that can be injected into this very toxic environment to basically do some bioremediation? Can we actually make this environment less toxic and instead produce something that is more pro-reparative? And the answer to the question is that we have done that in mice. So we've been able to create materials that we can inject into the stroke core to reduce toxicity and improve recovery. And so these materials we engineer thinking about how our body reacts to different types of foreign objects. So I'm sure all of you have had a splinter in the past. We don't have to take a poll on that one. But whenever you have a splinter, you know it just gets irritated and you can feel it. And maybe you took one in one of your children recently and you just take it out with the tweezers, and as soon as it's gone, it's like it's brand new. Nothing happened, right? And your body is reacting to that piece of wood, right, in some way. There are other materials that have been engineered to not do much besides take up space. For example, fillers. And so dermal fillers are very dumb materials. They just sort of come in and they just swell up, take up some space, but they don't really interact with the body. They're not meant to be like the splinter. You know, they're not irritating, causing any inflammation. And so our materials are kind of in between these two. We don't want them to just take up space. We don't want them to irritate the brain, but we do want them to be active, to sort of start cleaning up this sort of area. And so this is an example now of one of our materials being injected into the stroke brain. You can see here this structure of this material is like a honeycomb structure. And the amount of green cells, the toxic cells now has decreased substantially after injection, making the tissue surrounding the stroke core healthier. And we actually see recovery from these mice. Because this stroke region is less toxic, we now have very important cell types migrating in a second. This is a quantification to show that basically, as soon as you inject a gel, you actually have a decrease in all of these inflammatory markers that we can quantify. And so basically, hydrogel injection into the stroke brain reduces toxicity. So what I was going to say is that by reducing this toxicity, we actually invite stem cells into the brain. So after injury in all of your body, stem cells are mobilized because they are needed to actually repair and regenerate your tissue. In the brain, it's the same thing. We have stem cells in the subventricular zone that migrate through these different highways all the way to the stroke region, but usually they cannot enter the stroke because it's just too toxic and they die on the way there. Now that we have this less toxic material, we actually have stem cells, you can see them here in green, inside the stroke core. And this is very important because stem cells, as you may know, can become other cells, or in this case, other brain cells. But they also release factors that are not toxic but pro-reparative. So there's a lot of factors that are released by stem cells that are actually important. We actually see also that this material can improve blood flow. So all of these spaghetti strands are blood vessels in the mouse brain. And now you can see them here in the stroke core. Having blood flow is really, really important in order to bring nutrients and also oxygen and remove waste. And so I hope that I've shown you that we've been able to inject materials and create materials that can make the brain after stroke more hospitable. And we hope that this actually is able to recover the brain and in the future treat actual patients. So if this type of information is important to you, you're excited about how materials can promote human health or this type of topics, you can visit my website to learn more about what we work on. And lastly, I would like to thank this Pratt School of Engineering, Duke BME. Duke has been amazing since I've moved here, my lab, and of course funding. None of this will be possible without funding. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Gary Bennett, Dean of the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences, and it's my pleasure to introduce your next speaker, Professor Nikki Washington. Dr. Washington joined the faculty in the Department of Computer Science in 2020, a dedicated leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech industry and in computing education. She's the creator and director of the Cultural Competence in Computing Fellows Program, known as 3C, which addresses issues of systematic racism and bias that directly impact students from underrepresented groups, as well as the faculty who teach and mentor. Launched at Duke, this program initially hoped to attract 20 computer science faculty members. Instead, in its first year, 3C drew an astounding 144 individuals and 67 different organizations spread across 4 countries. Dr. Washington also leads the Alliance for Identity-Inclusive Computing Education, an initiative funded by a $10 million grant from the National Science Foundation to address barriers in K-12 and higher education, and to create measurable change by increasing and normalizing course and degree enrollment, retention, and completion rates of students from groups that are historically underrepresented in computing. Nikki is a native of Durham and a graduate both of Johnson C. Smith University and NC State University, where she became the first Black woman to earn a PhD in computer science. She also holds an appointment at Duke in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies. It's my absolute pleasure to call Nikki a colleague, and I'm pleased that you'll have an opportunity to hear from her today. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you. So I'll start by saying that as a computer scientist and as a Black woman, I often tell people that I am no longer concerned about the numbers in computer science. And that's interesting and kind of off-putting for a lot of people because we are a community of ones and zeros. If we can't compile it, then we don't want to worry about it or think about it. And so for me, it's been really important to identify the ways that our technologies that we develop and use are causing harm to people from marginalized identities. For example, facial recognition technologies disproportionately impact people who have darker skin tones because they're not able to be properly recognized. Healthcare algorithms are disproportionately impacting people who identify as Black and Latinx, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and more. The rideshare the rideshare applications that we use every single day now are starting to impact and have been impacting people who identify as trans, both as riders and drivers. And they also impact people who have disabilities. And surveillance technology is also disproportionately impacting Black and Latinx communities, especially law enforcement surveillance technologies. But if we take it away from even law enforcement, the phones and the devices that we carry around every single day now allow us to individually surveil each other, thereby allowing us to dictate who, quote, belongs wherever they are. And so for me, these are things that numbers can't tell the story about. These are things that are impacting people, and these are things that are being created by people who don't hold those marginalized identities. And so it's important that we start to think about how we get more people based on identities that are marginalized by race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, and ability into computer science. That's been a push that a lot of people have been working on for a while. But oftentimes what we see are these ideas and these solutions that are very centered around the people who are the most harmed and the most minoritized in the field. And they tend to be solutions that are deficit-based approaches. So they look at the fact that we just don't have enough students who identify as X in the pipeline. And I hate the word pipeline, but I'm using it here for a reason. We don't have them in the pipeline, or they lack the computational skills or the CS courses to major in computer science as an undergrad. They lack the ability or the GRE scores to also attend and pursue graduate degrees. So a lot of the solutions you'll see will be things that are focused on the student side, completing advanced placement courses in high school. Course degree and completion, and then graduate school degree, entry, and completion for students from those minoritized groups. But it's not just the students, because oftentimes there's the idea that we lack diversity among the educators as well. And here you'll see pushes and programs that are, again, deficit-based approaches that center faculty from these identities with the goal of getting them enrolled into tenure-track positions and tenured. But the problem is when we talk about CS being objective, because there's a colorblind approach that's often taken. We're looking for the best and the brightest. If they're not there in the pipeline, then there are these reasons that we talked about before. But objectivity is really subjective. And when we start to think about outside of course, degree, entry, and completion, what are the other things that are impacting students from pursuing or successfully completing computer science degrees? And these are just a handful of some of those reasons. Inaccessible materials. How many faculty over the last couple of years here are intentional about using closed captions, even after we all had to go to Zoom? How many of you are actually intentional about using closed captioning every time you use a meeting, or every time you hold a Zoom meeting? And what does that mean for those individuals who may have auditory issues? Entrance exams. So are we requiring students before enrolling in a computer science degree program as an undergraduate to pass an exam in order to major in the field? And what does that mean for students who did not have access at their high school to computer science courses? Inequitable teaching assistant selection. So do I see other individuals who look like me when I sit in my 101 course or my 201 course? And then if I don't, how are the TAs engaging with me if I show up as one of the few, if not the only, in my class? When I raise my hand in office hours, do they actually call on me, or do they assume I don't know what I'm talking about and go to the next person? On the faculty side, they're also facing issues as well. So this idea of H-index measures, based on how many people cite you in your discipline. Citations are often seen as political acts, and we know that the individuals who are often the most cited are the people who dominate in the field. And in computer science, racially, those people identify as white and Asian, and gender-wise, those people identify as men. And so if you are not one of those identities, then what does that mean for your citation count, your H-index measure, which then impacts your ability to pursue a job, to get tenure, as well as to get promotion? What knowledge counts in computer science? Again, are we focused more on the numbers and theoretical CS, or are we starting to look at more nuanced ways in which this field is impacting identities and other disciplines? There's a ton of social scientists like Dr. Rua Benjamin and Sophia Noble who talk about the harms that CS are causing, but why are we not talking about this in our field? We're the experts who understand how to develop these technologies, so what are we doing about it? Biased course evaluations. What are students saying about you as you show up as one of the few, if not the only, in your department? Do they recognize the fact that you are doctor or professor, insert last name? Or are you assumed to be a student, assumed to not be in the correct location? And is your ability to effectively engage with students impacted because students will not accept the fact that you are the one who has the position of expertise? And not only who gets to be the doctor in the room, but who gets the benefit of the doubt? Now, if we look across both students and faculty, they are equally experiencing different types of scenarios on campus. False notions of meritocracy. So again, we take the best and the brightest. But who defined what the best is? Who set the bar? And what does that look like? And how is that impacting people who don't hold those identities? Being stereotyped by faculty, staff, and students. I'm amazed every single semester how students in my class will say to me that there are still students who ask them, so are you here on athletic scholarship? Are you here because of affirmative action? And these are conversations that are happening in 2020 to 2023. Campus policing. Again, who gets to belong? Who is surveilled? And who is reported? Macroaggressions, I call them macro because they are never micro, from faculty, staff, and students. And then being asked to shoulder all of the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion in your department, in your college, and in your university or discipline. All of these are impacting students and faculty from minoritized identities, again, from race down to ability in harmful ways. And these cannot be quantified. These are things that are not displayed when we talk about passing an AP course or passing a course or getting through a degree. We miss all of this nuance. And so my work focuses on the fact that we can continue to have these deficit-based approaches that center students and faculty from minoritized identities. But when we do that, we're ignoring the people, policies, and practices that impact them. So my work focuses on redefining what is CS knowledge through a couple of ways. The first is the creation of my race, gender, class, and computing course here at Duke. And what we do is take students on this journey around what is identity all the way through what are the harms and oppressions to those identities, and ultimately, how does that translate to the technologies that we're seeing, developing, and using? And then as Gary mentioned before, the 3C Fellows Program, which trains computer science faculty globally to understand these topics around identity so that they can better impact the students and colleagues in their environments. Last is a 3C survey that we also developed in order to measure cultural competence. And finally, the computing student understanding and perceptions of race. This is a research project that is actually partnering with colleagues here in sociology, which allows us, again, to move more away from the numbers and start to think about the quality so that we can answer the questions of what is actual CS knowledge. We can change the answer to what is CS knowledge, and we can also change the answer to who gets to produce it. So thank you, and I'll pass it over.
I'm Sterling Wilder. I'm a proud member of the class of 1983 and the Senior Associate Vice President for Alumni Engagement and Development. And it is my pleasure to welcome Jennifer Francis, another outstanding woman from the Duke community, to the stage. Jennifer will be serving as the moderator for our panel discussion this morning. After a few years at Pricewaterhouse, Jennifer completed her master's and PhD at Cornell before joining the Fuqua faculty in 1987. She left Durham in 1991 to teach at the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago before returning to Duke in 1999, and she hasn't left since, thank goodness. She's been here ever since. As a member of the faculty, she teaches both core and elective MBA classes from managerial and financial accounting to valuation and global strategy. Her research focuses on the quality of financial reporting, notably earnings quality, and the relevance of financial reports. In 2017, she began working in the Provost's office, first serving as the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs before becoming the Executive Vice Provost in 2018. And most recently, Jennifer was appointed Interim Provost of Duke on January 1st, 2023. As Interim Provost, she serves as the Chief Academic Officer, responsible for the university's teaching and research mission, developing the institution's intellectual priorities, and overseeing their implementation. I first met Jennifer in the summer of 2012 when we hosted a volunteer leadership conference in Barcelona before the Team USA pre-Olympic basketball game. Yes, that was a really good gig, I have to admit. We asked her to give a lecture to our European alums, and I can tell you that she did not disappoint. She is a terrific faculty member as well as a terrific administrator. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's good to see you, Nikki. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your comments today. It was I really appreciated it. Fascinating, the work you're doing. I'm wondering if we could have a discussion just a little bit more at a personal level, particularly about, first of all, your path. How did you get to where you are? And each of your paths are so very different. I'm wondering if you could just comment on that a little bit. And Jana, maybe you could start for us.
Sure. So in some ways, my path was traditional, that I went to college and I went to graduate school and did a whole bunch of research, which is what you often have to do in my field. But in other ways, it was very untraditional. I never, for better or for worse, never took the easy route and did what I should have done to get me on the track that every other neuroscientist did. And so I've actually thought a lot over the past couple of years what made me take this kind of unconventional path. To give you an idea, I trained dolphins in a dolphin cognition lab for a year, which then taught me how to train mice and rats to have empathy and all kinds of other things like that. Like I said, untraditional. So what made me do that? And I think the answer comes to two things. I kind of popped out of the womb with I needed to understand the brain and philosophy at the same time. But they often say research is me-search, like you're always trying to understand something about yourself, and I have a really strong reaction to when people hurt each other, either emotionally or physically. And so I think everything I do in my career is I'm trying to solve that in somehow. I have to because I feel so morally compelled by it. And the reason I think I've been willing to take the unconventional route is because my parents, I grew up in this little town, Long Island, right next to a national lab. And at that time, everyone in the lab was working on huge questions, and they loved what they did. I mean, I've never been in a place since, even, I love Duke, but even Duke, I mean, it's like everyone loved what they did so much, and they were so inspired by the questions, and they were huge questions. And the other thing that was critical about it is that they were all doing, like, they knew that they couldn't answer those questions by themselves. So everything was totally interdisciplinary. My mom and my dad worked together. My mom was a food chemist, of all things, and my dad was a physicist and a physician, to give you an idea. And so I grew up thinking it was normal for people like them to work together, but I didn't put that together about why I've chosen the hard route until like 30 years later. So that's, I don't know if that was a good answer, but that's my route.
Thank you so much. Viviana.
I am an immigrant. I moved from Argentina to the US 33 years ago because I wanted to train in family medicine. And I started in the Chicago area, then I went on to be a rural doctor in Iowa. And then I moved on to, I wanted to have an academic career, but the majority of the greatest faculty I've ever had lived in the so-called real world before. They had done full spectrum family medicine. Family medicine, for those who may not know, is the doctors who go on from delivering the babies to doing palliative care at the end of life and everything in between. And I wanted a place where I could intersect my love for my profession and also a work with my feet in the public health area, where I believe strongly in that space of primary care and public health working together. And coming to Duke was looking for a academic space that was actually having that conversation. Duke Department of Family Medicine and Community Health being one of the pioneers in the country of thinking of that intersection and how we as doctors, clinicians, nurse practitioners and nurses and physician assistants belong in that space. So Duke gave me that opportunity. And part of the Duke brand is also part of this, is that I am not a better doctor than when I was a rural doctor in Iowa, but having the Duke name has opened international opportunities for me in ways I never dreamed.
Thank you. Nikki.
So I would say that my trajectory has been kind of a sine wave, but overall, my experience being born and raised here, my mom was a programmer turned manager at IBM for her entire career, so I was exposed to computer science very early. But my ideas of what I wanted to do never really aligned with where I was at the time. I had opportunities that were presented to me, and I just chose to take a chance on those because they seemed a lot more interesting and engaging at the time than what I was currently doing. That included even my major as an undergrad, which I originally thought was going to be business, but taking some computer programming courses in my first year of college and being convinced by my professor that you're really good at this, you should probably consider moving and changing majors. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess, I mean, that sounds good. And then the same thing happened in my senior year of college where I was offered a job at IBM. I knew I wanted to do a master's, but my university president basically said, well, I think I'm going to nominate you for this PhD program, this fellowship program. And I said, that's great, but I don't want to do a PhD. And her idea was, well, I don't care what you want to do. I'm going to nominate you. So if it comes through, the worst case is that you get to say no. And it came through. And I said, okay, why not? And the same thing happened coming into academia. So I started out in industry at the Aerospace Corporation upon graduation. doing top secret research, and I love telling people, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. But yeah, having the opportunity to be an adjunct at Howard University presented itself. And they actually needed a full-time faculty member instead. And there was this push and pull of, well, why don't you apply? And I don't know. And then I thought about it and again said, why not? So everything for me has been me having an idea of what I wanted to do, but something else being presented to me by someone who knew better or saw further along than I could, and taking advantage of it.
That's fascinating. I think we'll come back to that in a little bit, if that's okay. Tatiana.
Yeah, well, this is also interesting. I think that my experience is kind of in between of all of these experiences. I'm also an immigrant, but I was born in the US. My dad was studying, and while he was studying here, in the 70s I was born. So I moved here 29 years ago. And my goal was to come here to learn English, and then I was gonna go back to Columbia, which is where I grew up, and to study. But then when you're here, and I was a citizen, people started giving me all these opportunities. It's like, well, you're studying, well, you should stay, keep studying, right? And so I was like, okay, I just came here to learn English. So after a year, my English was more under control. It kind of plateaued, I have to say that. Anyway, so then I was like, oh, well, I'm interested in science, and I've always liked science, so I started taking more classes. And then, as soon as you're in like a path, I feel like you get on this train, and then unless you get off the train, you cannot just keep going, and I cannot just stay on the train. And so I went to a community college and transferred to UC Berkeley. And I was always interested in biology and engineering, and that's why I studied bioengineering, because it sounded like I wanted to. This is exactly what I wanted to do. But it was really chemical engineering and molecular and cell biology combined. Like, it wasn't really true bioengineering at the time. And then I always admire my professors. I like what they were doing. I like research questions, and I just asked them, how do I get your job? What do I need to do to have your job? And they told me, well, you need to get a PhD, you need to do a postdoc, and then you get a job. I'm like, okay, will do. And so I did that. I went to grad school, got a postdoc, and then applied for my position. Went to UCLA, and then Duke recruited me 5 years ago.
Well, this is fascinating. There's something that both of you have mentioned, and I'm sure you have as well, that I would love to follow up on, which is, clearly we've been influenced by advice that's been given to us. Sometimes we didn't realize that at the time or later on, but if you could comment on particular advice that has been really impactful for you. And Nikki, I'm going to start with you, because it sounds like you had a variety of these experiences.
I think the biggest piece of advice has come from my mom. She can be my biggest critic and my biggest fan simultaneously, and she's always told me that you are not the smartest person, but you are not the smartest person. So remain humble as you move into spaces, but recognize that you need to show up and show people who you are, but there are also people who are showing up as well.
Moms can be great.
They can sometimes,
Moms
right?
are great. Yeah. Viviana.
For me, it was a combination of my mom and dad initially. My father was a vascular surgeon, and my mom a PhD in biochemist in Argentina. But I grew up during the dictatorship. And opportunities during my generation, and I'm in my 50s, were very difficult. And so I wanted to get out. My mother said, go. And my father said, you will make your path. Your career doesn't exist. You will make it. And then, so that was one portion. And then coming here to Duke, Dr. Kathy Andolsek in the School of Medicine, I had been doing leadership things in the nation. And then she goes, why don't you look at the World Organization of Family Doctors? I'm like, the World Organization? Yes, Viviana. And her push to looking outside was the most impactful thing that happened. You heard about Latin 19, but prior to that, I was representing the World Organization of Family Doctors to the World Health Organization. So a lot of the things that we applied in the creation of Latin 19 were things that I had learned with 5 years of attending the World Health Assembly and the World Health Executive Board as a representative for family doctors from the whole world. So it was that go in this direction has been very helpful for me.
Fascinating. Gianna.
These are great ones. I think one of the things that's interesting to me about the advice I've been given in my life is that the advice I'm given within my academic career is in complete conflict with the advice I'm given outside of my academic career. I don't know if you guys have that problem. So that's been a really interesting one for me. But I think the one I'll share with you came from outside of my academic career, because I think within my academic career, again, they often tell me the opposite. But that's when a really interesting opportunity comes that's going to take you in a completely different direction, that feels like it's going to stretch you too much, that you're scared of. Do it. Do it because you can, and you're going to learn so much, and you're going to be able to, you're eventually going to bring it all together. And one of those for me at Duke, I'll share, was that when the opportunity came to help develop and direct our master in interdisciplinary data science. So it was a huge leap to say, okay, I'm going to leave the traditional neuroscience field and play this role, and I'll never look back, but just an example. So do it, take it, even though it feels uncomfortable.
Tatiana.
Yeah, so I think that for me, I have so many amazing advice, but I'll go back to my parents. I think that, one thing was always saying that you have to be your best at whatever you choose to do your best. You're not gonna be the best. We love you and all, but you're not gonna be the best. But you gotta be your best, and you have to strive to be your best. And I think that was important to just know that, my best was good enough. And the second thing was about creating community. And I think that it was like, you cannot be alone, and do not try to be your best by yourself. You gotta bring others with you and really encourage a community around you to really build a happy life. I mean, they were very concerned about making sure that I wasn't alone, and there was people around me that would understand and care about what I was doing in anything, right? Life or work. But yeah, so the community was important, and also being the best I could be.
Wow, well, thank you for sharing those. I think they resonate with a lot of people here. And something else that's come out in just what you've said so far is clearly each of you has faced challenges and obstacles. And as you look back on this, and not that they will be the last obstacles or challenges you will face, but maybe could you talk a little bit about some of those that perhaps were very impactful, and how you sort of dealt with those? And maybe, Vivaan, I could ask you.
When you're asking that question, I remember I was in medical school, and it was a very anti-women environment more than 35 years ago, or 35 years ago. And a professor said, "What do you pretend being a woman?" And oh my God, what do I pretend being a woman? I'm gonna show you. And this has always been in the back of my mind. What do you pretend being a woman? What do you pretend being an immigrant? What do you pretend having that accent? What do you pretend being brown? It's always in the back of my mind. I pretend the best, I pretend equity, I pretend to reach a space where we have more opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. And Jana?
As I keep alluding to, I haven't taken an easy path, so there are a lot of challenges I could choose from, but I think the one, I'll connect it to my talk, is that I think the hardest part of taking this path has been that I often feel very alone, or that I feel kind of isolated, because as an interdisciplinary researcher, it's like you never quite have a home, even if people want to. People are scared to mentor you because they're like, I don't really know how to do that stuff. I don't even know how to advise your career. And so it kind of takes this never-ending amount of courage and going back to remembering why you're doing these things. And it will tie back, I'm sure, to other things we'll talk about, mentorship, and then how I try to pass that forward. But that's, I think, the strongest, been the biggest challenge, is how do I make this interdisciplinary thing work, given the practical constraints?
Thanks. Nikki.
So I resonate with the isolation part. I think being a Black woman, and the only Black woman in almost all of my careers, has really impacted me. I would say I was denied promotion to full professor at my last institution, and it was due to a very clear biased set of course evaluations. That fight that I had to put into, and the time, the untracked and unquantified time it took to defend myself to still be denied, really influenced me heavily. It influenced all of the work I do, because it became, I tell people, my protest It was the courses that I do now. That course that I created was prior to Duke, but it rolled out here first. But that was my way of making sure that I could not rely on anybody I was working with to help me, to help see the nuance in what was showing up in my package. And so I had to find out how to teach students that what they were thinking about me, and it was a very small set, probably about 10% of the course, but how to get students to understand that there are historical and systemic inequities that are showing up in the ways that they see me and that they engage with me. And so that was probably the biggest hurdle I faced, because one, I know it's not something that just I faced, right? And I knew that in speaking up and out and in sharing my story, it makes it okay for other women, especially Black women in academia, to feel like that's me, that happened to me too, so I'm not alone, because so often we are the only one in our department, especially in a STEM field, that we don't necessarily have somebody else to go to and say, yeah, that happened to me too, directly where we are.
I'm sorry that adversity happened to you.
Thank
but
you.
I'm grateful you're here.
Thank you, yeah, everything happens for a reason.
It was a gift for us,
Yeah,
so thank you.
Thank you.
And Tatiana.
Yeah, so I think for me there are two things. One is, I was also one of the only female faculty in my department at UCLA in chemical engineering. And I think that, so this one thing, just what it takes to be a female faculty, young, and then you have children. So I had 3 kids, which means I was like pregnant for 8 years. It seems like I was. And so I think that just going through all that, through tenure, I had kids pre-tenure and post-tenure, and so navigating that. And then the other thing is being service-minded. That sometimes, as women, we do a lot of service and we want to contribute to our communities, because as I said, it's important to me that everything sort of seems to work, and if you all contribute, then it will be better. But that's not rewarded. And I think that that's kind of the type of advice that maybe people from the outside, like you're saying, people outside of academia will be like, well, why are you doing that? You're not even getting paid for it. Like, what is the point? And I think that being service-minded, not being recognized, is really difficult. And then people trying to help you while you're, having, like if you want to teach your class pregnant, they're like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that, maybe you should do that. And I think that letting you decide, as opposed to give advice that they maybe don't know, I think that it was hard to navigate all of those different, sort of having kids and daycares and all of this stuff. And I think the advice that you get is not always what right for you. I think you have to do the things that's right for your family and for yourself, which might not be what was for them with a stay-home wife, which I didn't have, right? Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on that service element, because I suspect that not only everyone up here, but many of you in the audience are in situations where there's not a lot of yous in the group, right? And so oftentimes you are asked to be part of things, right? In some ways to be not just representative, but truly to have that voice, being part of it. There just aren't enough of the voices. And I guess I'd like for you to talk a little bit, if you could, about your experiences and what kind of advice would you give now to young women of color, young men of color, and anyone who is in one of these groups, about how to think about handling that. Jana, do you mind starting off?
I was hoping you'd ask someone else first, because this is a hard one.
You're allowed to pass. There's a little block you can pass to someone else.
I mean, I think the problem is I'm still figuring it out. I think that's why I was hoping someone else could go first and I could bounce off of it. But I think what I will share is that, there's this tension between you want to help and then you only have limited time, both in your family, but also professionally. And so how do you balance that, right? That's kind of what you're asking. And so I would say that I'm not sure this is always the right answer, but I can say I get so much fulfillment from helping others that sometimes I try to lean in that direction, even if it can bite me in the butt in other ways, because that's why we're here, to help each other on this planet and in our local communities. And so it really does, at least it keeps me going. It gives me the resilience I need.
Viviana.
For me, family medicine, social justice, community justice are my vehicle for resilience. The work that you saw for Latin 19 has been largely self-funded, has been the work of a passionate group of people that started getting together, and we have made a huge difference with very limited funding. So there is a donate button on the Latin 19 website. But that has been part of this. It's like there are times when you're thinking, oh my God, I am an administrator, and I'm doing all these different things. And I've been trying desperately to get administrative support so that we can do and continue to do this work, because the pandemic hasn't ended. There are multiple other pandemics hitting community all the time. But it has been the getting together with so many passionate individuals who volunteer their time and who put this time that actually gave us a togetherness and a resilience and a pride to be able to say at Duke, I'm Latina, right? And I am proud to be Latina. But I couldn't do that before. And it was perhaps during that moment of standing up and making sure I elevated my community that gave me the strength, that gave me the opportunity to be here in front of you, because I wouldn't be here if I had continued to be just Viviana, the family doctor. It was the Latin 19 that gave me a national and international presence that has been surprising, but that was through that interest in service.
Nikki.
So I can say that I agree that there's a heavy burden and expectation that you feel to give back, but I, especially over the last 3 years, have mastered the art of the no. I have learned that no is a complete sentence, and I will use it as much as I can. And often, and it does not always go over well with people, but you know what? I tell people, you'll survive. You'll be okay, right? Because we want to do so much, but also I understand that my personal, mental, and physical and emotional health is important to me. And I can't do it all, right? I can't, as the one Black woman in my department, I can't meet with every student every week, because I have to explain to them, if I meet with you for 15 to 30 minutes and there are 10 other people who need to meet with me as well, then that's gonna take so much time, and so I'm sorry. So I space things out. I am very intentional about days in which I schedule meetings, Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's it. Don't ask me to do anything on a Monday or Friday, unless it's this. But that allows me space to breathe and regroup and recoup. And I think that we all have to remember that, because as Viviana just said, we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and this pandemic has taken a lot out of all of us emotionally and mentally over the last 3 years.
That's a great point. Viviana, do you want to follow up?
I want to add, because I don't want to sound like I get funding from my department as health equity director, right? I just want to make sure. Suddenly I'm like, oh, we're alive. I want to. But it's still the work is so much more. There's so much need to do more. Mm-hmm. And there is funding for research and NIH, and there's all these, but there's all these other spaces of service for which there isn't that much. Yeah. And that's where we need to find a way to make it make a difference.
And Tatiana, you touched on this, but maybe you can go a little deeper.
I think I need to learn that no is a complete sentence. I've got to be in school right now. So yeah, I think that I had a really hard time to say no, because you see that the need, and I think that you know that you will do a good job. But I think that it is true that they will be fine and someone else can do the job. I do think that, if the administration could recognize who can actually do more, and they could be giving support to do more, then I think more will get done, right? Like if you have someone scheduling your meetings or things that we end up doing so many administrative work that someone else could do for us. If someone takes care of that, then you have that extra time to do something else. And so I do think having more administrative support for people that are service-minded, and that's often not what happens. I think people that are not service-minded, that are maybe more successful in the research or appearance or more successful in they are the ones that get administrative assistance and support, at least in appearance. And so I think that being service-minded is not rewarded, and that's what I was saying earlier. I think that it's not rewarded to be selfless, to do work for others. That's not what gets you the awards, the recognition, the things that make you a bigger. That's not going to be in the news. Like if you look at the news, that's not in the news, unless you do like a lot. Then you'll be in the news. If normal things are not there. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the feedback on what would be helpful for each of you. You've got the right person sitting right here now.
I'm just saying,
There's something you said though. I just want to repeat, which I think is very true, which is the sense of you could do it, right? There's a sense in which all of us up here know if it came up, we know we could do it, and there's this tendency, therefore, to do it. And so I really do appreciate the ability to say no. The other thing I've learned is the ability to just be silent. Maybe somebody else will speak up, right? Maybe create a little bit of shame somewhere to see if somebody else doesn't speak up there. A last question for you, and this is kind of a twofer a little bit, to talk about mentoring. And I think of that both how you have been mentored, but also how you see mentoring for those that you are engaged with. And you can take both of those or either of those as you go through it. But Nikki, might you start?
I am indebted to my mentors. They have come in different spaces and places. They are not always computer scientists or people in STEM. They have often found me. And so what I try to do is the same for students, right? If I see a student who I know is not going to be the student necessarily that people run to, but I see something and they're not paying attention to it, then I try to be that person who sees wider and further for them like people did for me. I also try to take on as many students as I can, recognizing that a lot of students will feel comfortable coming to me, especially if they look like me. And I also try to point them to other students I have mentored in my past, right? This is like year 16 or 17 for me in academia. So I have students who've graduated from Howard and Winthrop who are out in industry and thriving. So if I can't take on that load, I always try to point them to other students and say, okay, I did this for you, so now it's your turn, right? To whom much is given, much is also required.
I like that. Pay it forward. Viviana.
To me, mentoring means it's something I love doing, and it's looking at sometimes recognizing in someone something they hadn't recognized before. So if it is clinical work, saying, do you realize you're a great proceduralist? Have you thought about doing women's health procedures? Me? Just showing that I believe in them as an instructor, as a person teaching clinical skills. Then I see those who are the community activists at heart. And how do you work to put that community activism into the work that you do in medicine? And then there are others that come to me and say, Viviana, I want your career. I was like, well, it took me 30 years to get here. But it's how do you work with that anxiety and help them organize? These are the things that you are good at. And then you saw the picture of the tábano, right? I'm there, but it's always showing that behind a claim, there has to be data that supports what you're saying. You will be able to say the uncomfortable things in a meeting. You're going to be able to say if you have data to support what you're saying, right? If we're talking especially about disparities, take a look at the data. It will take you in the right direction. Use your activism, and often for us, patient examples, community examples to support the claims that your passion is trying to get to.
Thank you. Tatiana.
Yeah, I think mentoring is such a core part of our job, and I think that we mentor, in our lives in our home with our neighbors' kids, and also in our jobs. It's such an important thing. I think that it's what you just said. It's about recognizing people's talents and then making them aware of them. I think that people sometimes tell them very short about what they can do and what they're good at. And I think showing them that they are, they can be empowered by whatever it is that they have, and they can use that in whatever context. I think it's very important. People just sell themselves short, especially women, a lot. And you can just identify and point it. It's like, did you see what you just said? You're a magician talking about this particular topic. You're so good at it. You really need to exploit that more. Like that maybe is your thing, to be able to communicate this particular piece of science. And I think that it is, of course, in the lab, different types of techniques people learn how to do. They're also superpowers. But, it really is recognizing their talents that I think is really important. And people recognize that in me, for sure. And they have being able to state them and be like, I think you're right. Okay.
It's such a good point. If I think back, it's sometimes just a small word or a couple words that somebody said that gives you that confidence to go even further. Johnny, you're going to be our last part on the relay.
That's a high order. But it's comforting to hear that we've all kind of converged on the same ideas about mentorship, I think, and probably through both failures and successes and lucks and all of the above. I had one, in terms of my own luck with mentors, I had one supervisor that told me for anyone in life, no matter whether you're in science or not, you need 3 things to succeed usually, you need 2 of the 3 things, okay, any 2. Those 3 things are really hard work, innate competence, and luck. So if you have 2 of those, you usually can succeed. And for me, a lot of the times that I could say I was lucky was because mentors put themselves out there for me, and they created a lucky opportunity for me. And that said, I kind of alluded to before, I've been so lucky to have people that believed in me at different times, but they also were like, you're getting so far away from what I know how to do. I'm nervous to mentor you. And I realized kind of in retrospect, it was like, what I need actually from them is what we were just talking about. Do you think I can do this? I needed some of those words, and I think that they were nervous to tell me that. And so that's what I'm going to then just bounce off of what you guys said. I think when I think about mentorship now, I try never to get scared about whether I'm good enough for them, and see my role as to do the best I can to help the mentees see what their strengths are, to help them feel confident to problem solve and to be a sounding board for them. And if I can give them specific advice, great, but that's not my main role. My main role is helping them have confidence in themselves so that they can go off and do what they will do best.
Well, thank all of you for this. I'll tell you, I feel emboldened right now. So I'd be pretty worried about the rest of the day if anybody's on my schedule there. But I'm feeling empowered after talking with all of you and seeing the great work you're doing. And so I just want to thank you and have our audience thank you for all of this.